This is a podcast by the News Minute, and you are listening to South Central.
Hello and welcome to South Central, a TNM podcast where we put the South at the center. I am Dhanya Rajendran, your host, and I think I should change the way I introduce because I'm sounding like
a tape recorder.
Like a tape
Which
recorder.
doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, okay. Next week I will try something new. But joining me in the studio is Pooja Prasanna, the reporting head of the News Minute.
Hello.
Okay, so before we go to the headlines, a quick reminder, South Central is a podcast that drops every Friday. We discuss two topics. We also look at the headlines from the South. This is a podcast to tell you everything South India, which you may not get everywhere. And we get South Indian experts to talk about South India, not Delhi experts talking about South India. So that's a difference.
I was watching some of the channels, at least on YouTube, to not give them ratings. They are getting people who are experts who have covered Haryana elections to comment on Tamil Nadu, on Kerala. I understand that the anchor cannot be from each of the states, but can't you get experts from the state?
Why can't a Haryana expert talk about Tamil Nadu?
Great, now I'll talk about Haryana elections too. You won't want to know, believe me.
Yeah. Anyways, we are covering the elections with News Laundry. There are elections in Assam and West Bengal too, do not forget. Srinivasan Jain is also covering these elections with us and he's already in Assam. His stories will start coming out soon. But our coverage is not possible if our readers, listeners do not pay money for that coverage. So the links are in the description. There is also a QR code. Please do support our coverage. You know, this is a time when mainstream media makes the most money. Everybody is paying for advertisements, for, these small placements within stories, everywhere, right? And big ads. So we don't make any of that money. We don't want any of that money from politicians or political parties. We are asking you to pay for our coverage. So do click on the link and allow Pooja to travel to Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc. to cover.
Because Anya's ditched us this time.
Yeah, but Pooja can do it only if you subscribe or if you give money to the election fund. Okay, so we'll go to the headlines.
We start with Telangana. Panic buying leads to closure of petrol pumps in several parts of Telangana. Panic buying triggered by rumors of fuel shortage has led to a threefold spike in petrol and diesel sales across the state. And the Dealers Association has had to come out and say that they have adequate fuel stocks that are available with HPCL, IOCL and BPCL. This is what happens when there's no clear communication. And the Prime Minister just comes and say that the way you cooperated with me during COVID, I'm sure you'll do now also. 10 to 12 people have been killed and 20 people injured in a bus and truck collision in Markapuram, which is in Andhra Pradesh. The accident happened at a turning point where a private travel bus collided with a tipper vehicle that was loaded with gravel. The bus belongs to Hari Krishna Travels and it was traveling from Nirmal in Telangana to Nellore in Andhra Pradesh.
It's quite sad, right? The number of bus accidents. At least this was a head-on collision, but we see so many of these buses on fire cases too.
But I feel like we live literally by luck, especially in India every day, right? You're walking on the streets, a compound collapses on you, you're dead.
I'm very scared of traveling by bus. I went to Mangalore once. I don't travel to Mangalore by flight after covering the plane crash. Then I went by bus. And
which is just, if not more, dangerous.
I only go by train now.
Legislative Assembly likely to meet on 28th of March and pass a resolution on Amravati as the sole and permanent capital of Andhra Pradesh. My God, I think the people of the state really need some closure on having one capital or how many of our capitals, but let's get on with it. Moving on to Karnataka. I have non-veg on Shivratri. Siddaramaiah counters budget timing charge. This is an NDTV headline and I've seen the Kannada speech. He said mamsa, which is meat. So let's do away with terms like non-veg. And this is, just to quickly give you context, there were people who were asking him if he presented budget in the not in the Rahu Kala this time. And has Siddaramaiah suddenly become religious and all of that? To which he went on to say that in his entire life, he's never looked at Rahu Kala and Yamaganda Kala and all of that, which are auspicious and bad time and stuff like that. But this time, his family members and a few officers insisted, so he presented the budget at an auspicious time. But he went on to add that I eat meat whenever I want on Ugadi, on Shivratri, and whenever I feel like. And that shouldn't be a problem. What is wrong with it? Many people were squirming even within Congress sitting around him.
See, everybody believes in some what is it?
Yeah.
Something lunatic like this.
But I know where this is coming from. The superstitious Dhanya Rajendran, who has some weird superstitions.
Only
Nothing
one
good-
or two. Yeah.
Nothing good to be started on Tuesday.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my superstitions. Okay, next one, Pooja.
Venues serving liquor must initiate rigorous age verification protocol, says Karnataka High Court. Now, this came after a case was registered against the owners and staff of a brewing company under the provisions of the Juvenile Justice Act and the Karnataka Excise Act for allegedly allowing a few minor boys around age 15 to consume alcohol. And a class 10 student died after he fell from the 7th floor of a residential apartment, and alcohol was found in his body in the post-mortem. That's what triggered this entire case. So I think it's a great thing that the High Court has come. I know that not just now, from like 20, 25 years ago when I was much younger, very close to our office around CBD, many pubs did allow students even in school uniform because they just bribe people. I'm sure it's gotten stricter, but it can get more stringent. Will visit Chamundi Hills and apologize, says Ranveer Singh to Karnataka High Court for his comments on Kantara Deity. Senior advocate Sajjan Puaya, who represented Ranveer Singh, agreed to file an affidavit of apology and visit the temple deity Chamundi in Mysuru's Chamundi Hills. I don't know why he's going to Mysore. He's supposed to have offended deities in
What did
the
he say?
coastal He imitated that Kantara. He was saying what a great movie it is, and he did a certain imitation. I don't want to do that because there'll be a case filed against me. And he did apologize, by the way, but apparently that was not enough. Moving on to Tamil Nadu. DMDK secures 10 seats in the DMK alliance deal. In a significant boost to its political revival, the DMDK that was formed by the late Tamil superstar Vijay Kant has secured 10 seats in the DMK-led SPA, which is a secular progressive alliance. And they have emerged as the third largest partner in the coalition after DMK and Congress. Congress, by the way, has gotten 28 seats after a lot of back
This
and
is a
forth.
surprise for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
DMDK actually walking out with 10 seats.
When Congress got 28 after so much of haggling.
Yeah, and CPIM is stuck at 5. VCK is at 8.
Yeah.
A lot of people are not happy with the DMDK getting so many seats, but I think for the DMK, the logic is that there is a vote bank for the DMDK even after Vijay Kant's passing away, and that vote bank will then come to the DMK, at least in 50 to 60 constituencies.
So interestingly, DK's vote bank does not overlap with DMK, so that's good news for them too. The other front, AIADMK will contest 169 seats. They have allotted 65 constituencies to allies, which includes BJP. BJP has settled, quote unquote, settled for 27 seats, and that is one less than Congress. And 8 seats they only retained 8 seats of the ones they contested in 2021. The good news for BJP, though, they've gotten seats in the state, across the state, not just in one region. Last time, I think they concentrated on the Kongu region, which is not the case this time.
So, Tirupura Kundram, which is the constituency where the BJP is trying to communalize a lot, has been retained by the AIADMK, not given to the BJP.
Good news.
Yeah.
Durandar 2, The Revenge, faces legal hurdle in Tamil Nadu. There is a plea that has been filed seeking ban ahead of elections as the film smashes box office records. Now, the allegation is that there are a lot of real life events that have been dramatized and that could in some way influence the Tamil Nadu elections. So they have sought a ban till at least after the elections. CPM and BJP now cooperating as CJP in Kerala, says Mallikarjun Kharge. He alleged that CPIM in Kerala is operating in tandem with the BJP's agenda, prioritizing communal interests over the welfare of people. This government spares no one, not even the divine, while prioritizing bars and wine parlors over essential local businesses, he said. A connected headline, rubbish, says Kerala minister who rejects UDF's claim of RSS LDF nexus.
I know every Kerala election there will be some nexus which is alleged of, and I think we'll discuss more about all these allegations in our first discussion of the day. So joining us to talk more about whether Pinarayi Vijayan is going to make a comeback are 3 journalists. M.G. Radhakrishnan joins us from Thiruvananthapuram. He is somebody who you would call Tapana of Malayalam journalism, I guess. Tapana means veteran in Malayalam. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on South Central.
Thank you. Good to see you in the morning now.
Yeah. And junior Tapana, I don't think we can call him that yet, is Srijan Balakrishnan, who's also joining us on South Central. Thank you, Srijan.
Thank you very much. But I'm not a Tapana. I don't want to be one also.
Also joining us is our Kerala Bureau Chief Haritha John, who has been traveling to quite a few districts covering elections. Haritha, morning, welcome to South Central.
Thank you, Danya.
Okay, so I'll jump to the discussion. MGR's main question is, will Pinarayi make a comeback? Because this election is also boiling down to Pinarayi Vijayan, right?
It's still uncertain in the sense that, we don't see any perceptible wave as such on the ground right now, though the anti-incumbency surrender as the 2024 Lok Sabha election, 2025 LSG election. That is right. But I don't know whether that trends will stay on in this assembly election, even though I still think that the UDF enjoys an edge. But generally, it looks like a tough battle. And now, in fact, there is a race going in between the daily temperature and the electoral heat as well. It's so I think people are on the ground without, even, despite this heat and all, but generally, some of these seats, for example, UDF has a long road in the sense that they made a pretty bad show in the last election, 2021. So to cover that distance, it's not easy for even, with the anti-incumbency sentiment favoring them, it is not very easy. And there is a huge sort of groundswell of support for the, the present incumbent legislators of the LDF. So all these factors, how all these factors are going to play out is not yet clear. But having said that, I think UDF definitely has an edge even now. Taking into consideration other factors like this consolidation of minorities and all. Yeah.
I was actually thinking, when are the elections where we have seen so much of focus on a leader, right?
Exactly.
Like it's a leader versus a front, I feel, almost in Kerala.
But who would that work in favor of? That's what I want to know. This presidential style that has become, which is so rare for Kerala, which is almost common in Tamil Nadu, but very rare for Kerala. Who will it benefit?
Srijan, you want to take that on whether Pinarayi has become the main election issue, or like LDF is saying, it's about continuity now?
No, actually, it is Pinarayi versus all. That is the scenario now. So, throughout the last 10 years, the LDF rule is centered around Pinarayi, and he was solely responsible for all achievements and all blames. So, it was projected as a single person-led government, and no other minister was as visible as him or something. Even now, even if you ask me, I still fumble with the names of ministers who are not even familiar to us. So that was a peculiar scenario as far as Kerala is concerned. Earlier, it was not like that. So whatever achievements the government has done in the last 10 years are listed against Pinarayi Vijayan's leadership and his vision and all. So if there is some failure or something, that should also naturally go to his list only, and his viewed as his failure and a verdict against his style or something. So I would like to take up from where MGR sir concluded. So I am saying a consolidation of minorities like not visible in the recent times towards UDF. So if you check the statistics, as per the National Election Survey by CSDS, they reviewed the 2021 polling data, and their conclusion was that at that time, LDF polled 5% additional Muslim votes and 6% additional Christian votes than their usual tally. So the massive alignment of Christian and Muslim communities towards the LDF gifted them this huge result last year, that 99 seats and all. Now I think all these additional votes they have polled has already gone back to UDF from Christian and Muslim communities. And I'm afraid there will be erosion from the core minority vote bank of LDF who also towards the UDF side. And if that happens, the signals will be very clear and it is going to be a clear and convincing UDF victory. And along with that, as you mentioned here, the presidential style campaign, the UDF last year doesn't have a leader who can match the stature of Pinarayi Vijayan. But now VD Satish is slowly emerging as a leader who can be a competitor to Pinarayi Vijayan. Whether the so I'm not discussing, I'm not leaving the other internal issues of UDF there. VD Satish is a tall leader, he is a strong leader, he is taking on Pinarayi Vijayan head on. So that was not there last year. So that is one key difference. So somebody who is fond of the leadership style of Pinarayi Vijayan, who thinks that a strong leadership is what the state is requiring now, they have an answer in VD Satish in UDF. And also the federal style of leadership in UDF will satisfy the other section of people. There are 3-4 power centers and it won't be an autocratic rule anyway. So all these are, I think, turning out to be good for the UDF as the campaign progresses.
No, so I was actually thinking that I have not been reporting out of Kerala, so I'm very wary of saying any wave or any sentiment. I'm generally, even if I travel, I think it's very difficult to gauge people's sentiments, right?
You don't just talk to drivers and give your verdict?
No, I do like to talk to drivers and just see what they think, but I think verdict cannot be given. But MGR sir, one thing, like even if you watch all these TV channels where, they're going and asking people, ആർക്കാണ് വോട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, നിങ്ങൾ ആർക്കാണ് വോട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, ആര് ജയിക്കും ഇപ്രാവശ്യം, like who will win, who are you voting for? I think it's like 2 people will say LDF, 2 people will say UDF, then 3 people will say LDF, 3 people will say UDF. There is so much of confusion, I feel, or the people are just like, they've decided who to vote for, but they're just saying something else. I met a minister, I think a few weeks ago in Thiruvananthapuram, and he was saying that there is concern that the minority vote has gone away from the LDF. But even then, are they putting all the eggs in one basket by projecting Pinarayi itself as the face? Or is his goodwill so huge that they don't mind taking that risk?
Well, it's as we have discussed it before, this seems to be a universal sort of fascination for this robust leaders or this supreme leaders, as it were. So Pinarayi fills that bill so well. He's a man of action. He's a person seen as someone who can deliver, which was clear during the post-COVID election 2021. And even now, he's seen as a man who is capable of doing things. So whether you like his authoritarian style or not, seems to have gone behind in the sense that people, many of Malayalis actually, even without politically aligning with the left, seem to have developed some kind of fascination. At the same time, the other side also, because there are so many people who are completely hostile to him, that also is increasing. As Srijan said, both the strength and the weakness of the left seems to be Pinarayi Vijayan and his style of functioning. But at the same time, even the opposition cannot rule out the kind of things that he has actually brought into Kerala in terms of, infrastructure development and other things also. But this seems to be kind of a tightrope walk between, delivery and democracy. So this is something which, everybody knows that he's not a perfect Democrat. Everybody knows that. But how many of how many people, especially people from the lower sections, are so concerned about democracy at a time when they are actually going through so many difficulties? There's something which is not clear. I don't know, because the people like us, people, the Chatterati, the middle class, the people who, the panelists or people who crowd the television screens are completely, they're all so concerned about the democracy and freedom of expression and things like that. But what about the rest of the people? I don't know whether that is going to cut deeply into them. So this fact that he's not democratic or he's too much of an authoritarian. I don't know whether it will be a major issue among the large section of the people in Kerala, even in this election. And the minority consolidation also, seems to be, on the ground, it looks like a complete consolidation. But I think the Christian community, definitely some kind of process are going on within the community, which you hear from, when you talk to, who are in the, top in church leadership and all. They're not quite happy with the way Muslim League is going to dominate the UDF. Now, this was quite visible in 2021 also. This fear, the Christian community, there is this growing sort of, difference between these two communities. It's been going on for some time in Kerala. Now, this increasing tendency of Muslim League being a major player, or which is going to be, which was a major issue in 2021. Some of the church leaders actually came out saying that, it is not acceptable that the problem with the UDF was that, if UDF comes back, Muslim League will be holding a huge sort of position within the UDF. So there seems to be some kind of a growing sort of distancing within the Christian community from the original position of rallying behind the UDF. So this may work out to some extent. So this huge 100% consolidation of both the minorities behind UDF is not, you have to see in a more nuanced way, it seems.
Yeah, I take NGS's point on how democracy means different things to different people, because in my head, I was thinking the fact that there are multiple power centers in UDF is good for democracy, though it's bad for the party. There isn't one leader. But Hariva, you've been on the ground. Tell us, do you see an edge for UDF, or what are you picking up?
Yes, I do see an edge for the UDF, but I feel that there's no way for UDF because after 2024 elections, Lok Sabha elections, and this recent LSD elections, I was expecting a strong anti-incumbency at the ground as well. So I was expecting a UDF wave that would have been an easy path for UDF to walk over, but that is not the case. Maybe it is because of the factionalism, because people were talking about the factionalism within the UDF, and even the people, like people whom the normal people whom I spoke to, as you said, like the people whom I met in the roads, they were vocal about why it would have been an easy path for UDF and why they are not using it well, kind of attitude that is people are giving. And this anti-incumbency, what I felt is that people are having a love-hate relationship with Pinarayi Vijayan, that at one point of time, they are having strong hatred towards him when he becomes arrogant or at some point. But in a larger context, they are taking it as a strong leader, a concerning leader, and even the people who are in supportive of BJP have expressed that like Pinarayi is a strong leader and he has done something in last 10 years. So it's kind of a mixed feelings, mixed signals are getting from the ground about. So there is no strong anti-Pinarayi feel in the ground. So there is no strong anti-incumbency, but maybe in the elections it might change and also we cannot the trends cannot be same for LSD and Lok Sabha elections. It cannot be same for the assembly elections. I understand that. But it would have been easy for UDF because there were strong reasons to criticize the government. There were strong allegations, but there is some unpreparedness. There is some unplanning that we could witness in the ground, especially in the Palakkad district, if we take for an example, the Palakkad constituency, not district. So UDF was so unprepared that we could not even find a single poster or the campaign is so called when we visited Palakkad constituency. At the same time, you could see the entire town is filled with Shobha Surendran's posters or only BJP flags.
I want to go to Srijan because I think the key word here is the BJP. Now, within Kerala, we will talk LDF, UDF, LDF. But for people outside Kerala, what they're trying to understand is, will the BJP win anything in Kerala? And if the BJP still cannot manage to win more than 1 or 2 seats, why does the BJP not work in a state? That's the biggest enigma, I think, for anyone outside Kerala.
Well, I think the strategy of BJP is slightly different this time. They're focusing on a few constituencies where they think they can win. And they have almost left out the other constituencies. They don't bother about that. Even the number of seats they have allotted to new entrant 2020, they are contesting around some 20 seats or something. And BDJS is contesting in some 26 or something. So BJP doesn't want to cross the 100-seat barrier. They are on 97 or something. I'm not quite remembering. So even in the 97 seats, they have classified a few seats, I think a dozen seats or less than that. So they're focusing their entire force. There is the feeling that I am getting. So they want numbers. I think Rajiv Chandrasekhar being a corporate style governor, he just want to prove with the numbers. So focusing on 12 seats and winning 4 or 5 will be a better proposition than they're working in all the 140 constituencies and ending up with 1 or 2 seats.
No, but Srijan, is even 4 or 5 possible for the BJP? That's even a big number, right? 4 or 5 for the BJP.
So that is what they are trying to prove. They at least want to win some 4 or 5 seats. So that is going to be a game changer. And there are seats like Harita just mentioned. Palakkad is one very sure seat they are now hoping for. Palakkad is one seat. Manjusharam is another seat. And obviously Nemam, where Rajiv Chandrasekhar personally is contesting, there they are trying very hard. Kalakutam, Muralidharan is trying very hard. Even in Katakada, in the article constituency, P.K. Krishnadas is trying very hard. So there are a few seats where we have to look for the BJP advent and all. And I'm not sure whether they will win in all of these seats, but it is possible to win 2 or 3 is what my feeling now. And regarding the allegations also, like if you take a constituency like Tripunithura, for example, Tripunithura is one seat where BJP had high hopes. So last year, Thoravur Vishambaran and before that, Dr. K.S. Radhakrishnan, they all polled a large number of votes, and there was an impression that they may even win that time. And now they have handed over that seat to 2020, and some serial actress, I think Anjali Nair, serial actress, is a new faces contesting there. So there are some mysteries in the candidature also. Some sure seats they have left for the insignificant candidates, and we still don't know the reason. So that is where the CJP allegation, even yesterday, Kharge has stated it yesterday. Rahul Gandhi has been stating that for the quite few weeks. So we're not sure, but the allegation has some factual substance like this. In a few key seats, BJP doesn't have serious contenders. So is it so? I'm not sure.
But MJR sir, we talk about how RSS has a strong presence in Kerala. But why have they not been able to convert that is a question we've asked time and again. But even 4, like we're talking 3 to 4 seats is big. So what are they doing differently this time?
Well, I think as Srijan said, there seems to be some kind of change in the strategy that BJP has adopted this time. Maybe because the business magnate is now at the helm of affairs. He is seeing it as a business strategy making, in the sense that they're concentrating on a few seats this time. Because in the last 2024 election, BJP came top in almost 9 or 10 assembly segments. So these are the segments they are now concentrating. And so, as he said, instead of, trying to work hard in every constituency, they're now focusing on a few seats. And why they're not making a big dent electorally is a very interesting question. But these shakas, the numbers, for instance, they have now declared that they are going to increase the number of shakas from the present 7,000 to 10,000 soon. But so what is going to happen is that even if they are going to, increase the number of shakas and all, electorally that doesn't count much because of certain fundamental structural issues, because 50% minority block is going to be there for a long time. So this is something which has become almost insurmountable for them. because they could make some inroads into minorities last time 2024. But what happened in 2025 LSG, that votes also have gone back from them. The 5% Christian votes that the CSDS said. That seems to be the drop that they suffered in the last LSG election, because their vote share came down from about 20% to about 15% in the LSG compared to Lok Sabha. So this is something that's going to be a major thing. The Hindu votes, are divided into 2 or 3 blocks. So beyond the point, it is very difficult for BJP to increase their presence electorally because of this fundamental demographic structural blocks that they have in Kerala. So this is something which is going to be there for a long time. So, but cutting across this particular problem is the way they have come tops in about 9 to 10 assembly segments. So they are sure that if they are going to concentrate, if they are going to focus all their energies in 9 to 10 constituencies, they might win 3 or 4 seats. Or maybe at least 3 seats this time. It is not unlikely. Completely cannot rule out. But BJP's particular characteristic is that they build up, they hype a lot before the election. They're saying that they will win that big. But what happens ultimately is that they will be left with whatever they performed last time. But this time, definitely 2 or 3 seats are quite possible for them. But the deal also, about the deal also, because I think the allegations of the BJP left's sort of deal, I don't subscribe to that, because it is very difficult for 2 parties like that to have a formal official deal. Maybe there could be some kind of undercurrents, but this can work the other way also, because in constituencies like Rani and Koni, which is in the vicinity of Sabrimala, in Pathanamthitta district, where the BJP is a very strong player. Actually, I feel that it is they have fielded very weak candidates, the BJP, even in Rani, which is right around Sabrimala. In Rani, they have fielded a 2020 party candidate, and Koni also they have fielded a very weak candidate. Koni is the place where Surendran, BJP Supremo, contested last time. So I think this is actually meant to to put the left in trouble, because so not to get the anti-left vote divided. So I think the Congress, and whether it is an official deal or something, but this can actually this fielding of this weak BJP candidates could actually work in Congress, UDF's favor than to the left. So that not very clear whether who is having deal with whom is still is not a very clear issue.
Yeah. So to add to what other Christians have said, I also feel that the deals happen both ways. So it is a handiwork of local leadership also. If in a particular constituency, if they have helped them to win some panchayats or something, there is a quid pro quo happening and they are paying back at this time. So it is not a one-way thing. Both friends are dealing with BJP in different ways. But the point is that how the optic is being played out. Last year and the election before that, CPM was in the forefront alleging that there is a Congress-BJP nexus and they are hand in glove and they want to defeat CPM. This time the game is around. The Congress has the first mover advantage. They have already established this theory that CJP is a nice name coined by them. And the campaign is going like this throughout the state. So that is going to make the difference. The deal is done by both.
I must add quickly that, this is work for Congress in 2 states very decisively. In Karnataka, they kept alleging that JDS is the B team of BJP. They have an understanding.
It became, but
I mean, later it did become. In Telangana, they kept alleging that BRS is the B team of BJP, and that worked in their favor. So we don't know if that.
I was actually thinking when MGR sir was talking about hype of the example of Annamalai. Annamalai was hyped as if he is going to like sweep not one constituency, but where he didn't stand also. And then he finally lost the elections, right?
Even the LDF, the local self-governance, this one,
Yeah.
they spoke like BJP came third, but it was such a celebrated, position
Yeah.
across national.
So I think Srijan has to leave, so we'll ask him about. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, money, right? We talk about numbers of every other kind, but Kerala is an outlier in the sense that unlike the other southern states, there isn't a lot of funds that are pumped into elections as much as, say, Karnataka or Telangana. This time, BJP, we hear, is focusing a lot of monetary power in Kerala. How much of a factor will that be for all three fronts?
Well, I think BJP and left has enough funds to spend for the campaign. Congress was the one who was which was lagging behind. But this time, I think with Telangana and Karnataka supporting wholeheartedly, Congress is also doesn't have a fund crunch. So all three fronts are going to spend hugely here. And we have already seen this television ads, social media ads. There is a series of AI videos that Congress is regularly producing. Even the tagline is better this time. Kerala Valaram UDF Nayikim. So they I think they hired some smart agency this time. That was a change of pattern. They have money this time. So BJP, I think BJP has a hell lot of money and they're spending it like anything. Recently, they have acquired, I think, a dozen social media pages, popular pages of film, entertainment news and all, and they're pushing all their content through those pages. And all this, the battle is going on all fronts, social media, traditional media, even the conventional campaigns like hoardings, micromanagement, everything, everywhere there is this tight fight is happening. Three fronts are spending enormously, but obviously BJP will have an advantage. If you ask who is going to spend more, that obviously will be BJP because there is no fund for them. And being in power for 10 years, CPM is also having enough fund to meet with them. Now, I think KC Venugopal is very much in the picture. So he is controlling Karnataka and Telangana, and there is fund flow. There is no issues for the Congress also.
There is enough money, Pooja. Don't worry about it. There is enough money for everybody.
Elections have gone up significantly in Kerala.
Yeah, no, in Telangana, we are talking about candidates spending crores, like
30 crores.
Yeah, if it's a real estate tycoon, then they spend more. Anyway, I think both MGR and Srijan wanted to had a lot of events from morning itself, so they have to leave. So thank you to both of you for joining us on South Central, and we'll come back. Let's see whether Pinarayi gets a third chance, and that'll be history, right? Because he's not once, twice, but thrice.
If he wins.
If he wins, yeah, if he wins for the third time. So thank you to both Srijan and MGR sir for joining us.
Even otherwise, it is already history. 2 full times back to back. No other had.
Yeah, history again. Okay, since the Tapanas have gone, I want to ask Haritha something. Haritha, everybody kept mentioning this 2020, right? They started as a organization, a social organization for people who do not have context. It started by this company called Kitex. You may have seen the advertisements of the Kitex Munda and Kitex Lungi. And now they have been contesting elections. They have had good luck in the local body elections. Why did they go with the BJP and what is their seat allocation like?
Yesterday, Sabu Jacob, 2020's leader, Sabu Jacob was telling that LDF got into power in 2021 by distributing food kits. So, but when I was thinking, it is kind of ironical that Sabu Jacob says that because 2020 got popular in Kedakkambalam region after they provide a lot of freebies, a lot of rebates and a lot of goods to people in that Kedakkambalam region who work for Kitex Group. So that is how this whole organization, this 2020 group got popular in Kedakkambalam. And that was one of the major reasons they have a supermarkets there. They have a township there. So that is how they got this local polls. They got prominence in local polls by providing freebies, by providing kits, by providing ration. So they had that kind of strategy there, and that was one of the reasons they got popular. And their apolitical strategy in this whole Kerala politics, it is. If we ask whether it is relevant, because at local level it is relevant. Because there were a lot of people who was fed up with this whole traditional whole politics was moving towards 2020, because they thought that it was a perfect alternative away from all these political parties, all these traditional political parties. They chose 2020 as another option. So that made the party very relevant at that point of time. But at this election, it was kind of weird. And also at the ground, people feel that, not just at the ground, even the political analysts feel that it's kind of a dangerous trend that that 2020 is taking out now, this apolitical stand by bringing in celebrity candidates into the array, into the election array. And it is not just the celebrity candidates. We have earlier seen celebrity candidates, but the celebrity candidates with a very weird kind of political sense, or very different kind of political sense, or no political sense at all.
I don't think they can continue to say they are apolitical, right, Haritha? Because they are part of the BJP's alliance now.
Correct.
Yes, they are, because they wanted to get into the assembly politics, wanted to get to the legislative electoral politics. So there was last time they tried, but they did not have a chance, and they are so much against UDF and LDF that they cannot align with LDF or UDF. So their only option was NDA left. And for NDA, it was a different kind of, I don't know whether it is a PR strategy or a different kind of play this time, that they have given a major chunk of their constituencies to 2020, that within the BJP itself, that many prominent leaders within the BJP itself is not satisfied with this whole decision of giving a majority of seats to 2020.
No, it reminds me of how Aam Aadmi Party came. This even, they'll talk about, they'll be party agnostic, or rather ideology agnostic, and then they'll say we'll talk about what impacts the voter immediately.
No, but I think that there's a crucial difference between the Aam Aadmi Party and
No,
this
but
party.
in the sense what they're based on.
No,
right?
this is started by a businessman.
Of course.
This is not Aam
Aam
Aadmi
Aadmi Party was supported by businessmen, lots of
No,
things.
but I
Yeah.
definitely don't agree. Aam Aadmi Party was started by people who are also social activists, who have worked with the people on the ground.
But Tanya, in India today, my question to you is this. In India, do we have space for parties that say we are equidistant from all the ideologies?
No, that's what I want to just add to what Haritha is saying. I feel for the BJP strategically, the reason why they have a 2020 in their fold is that what is the biggest criticism that you hear about Kerala? Two things, right? One is, there are no jobs in Kerala, therefore all young people in Kerala move out. Like the most I'm told is, why are you sitting in Bengaluru? You're a Malayali, go back, right? So that is one. Second is, there are no industries in Kerala because of all the labor issues and others. And that is a thing, that Kerala has not been able to bring big industries, but also it's a very landlocked state. You can't expect Kerala to start some of the industries which Tamil Nadu has. There are lots of Kerala specific problems and a lack of imagination also from all parties, right? So Kitex, which is run by this 2020 Sabu, moved out of Kerala to Telangana, I think just before the Telangana elections happened. Of course, the BRS got no advantage out of it. But the point is for the BJP to stress that, look, Kerala is not a business-friendly state. If Modi ji comes here, we will have a double-engine sarkar. We'll also have industrialists getting their due. They will point to 2020 and say, look, a very successful businessman is supporting us because he understands that it is our policy which will work for industry. And that's what the BJP is trying to tap. But the candidates which 2020 has chosen, apolitical, political, whatever
What
it is.
is apolitical?
I don't know. And this Akhil Marar guy, who's one of their candidates, after this Dilip case verdict came, he actually did a video in which he says, look at this car. Do you think a rape is possible in this space? That's the kind of toxicity that guy has. Kerala is also having a lot of these celebrity candidates, not just in parties, but standing otherwise also. So, Haritha, I'll just end by asking you this. Now, all the guests, Region and MGR and everybody that we speak to agree that there is no wave for the UDF, which is very evident now, right? Maybe there's a silent wave, we don't know. Like in Andhra Pradesh, when Jagan was completely wiped out, I really thought there was a silent wave which nobody was aware of. whether the silent wave, we don't know because it's silent, obviously. But there's no wave which is very obvious. Is that itself a positive sign for the LDF? Because you have been in governance for 10 long years and there is no large negative sentiment against you.
Yeah, there is a positive thing for LDF, but it wouldn't be easy for either LDF or UDF. That's what I felt. And the silent wave, we cannot predict it because in LSD elections, we have seen that silent wave for UDF. So LSD elections, that wave was not expected by LDF, but there was a silent wave for UDF. But this elections, what is the most positive thing for LDF is that their MLAs. There are a bunch of MLAs, at least in 30-35 seats. They are very sure about those seats because those MLAs are very popular in their constituency. In the other constituencies, it is a kind of tight fight. It will be a tight fight for UDF too. Because they were not able to use the anti-incumbency. There is anti-incumbency, but they had to escalate it. That escalation did not happen from the side of UDF. So they couldn't, in many constituencies, they couldn't do that. So that also might benefit LDF. And it won't be a easy run for LDF too. It is tight. But there is always an edge for UDF at whatever we say because it is last 10 years. People have that, we need a change kind of at least slightly, they have that feel.
Dhanya, my question to you is, Harita was talking about this rule of not repeating for more than 2 consecutive terms. Clearly, we've seen that that's a very selective rule that is applied, applicable for Shailaja, not applicable for Pinarayi and a few other things. So is that convenience, that over ideology, over what they talk about that we're seeing? Practical, pragmatic politics,
of course. They
perhaps.
have used it at their own convenience and they do get criticized. But the point, like everybody was saying, is that there's no criticism from within the party, right?
Is that true though? There is TK Govindan who's come out, I mean, not particularly about that.
No, they have to come out of the party. They are coming out of the party and then the party is just writing them off saying that, I think Pinarayi even ended up using the word chetta for Sudhakaran. And then he had to say that why can't the word be used? It is not an abuse in itself. Like when did it become an abuse? I feel like rules are very convenient, but I want to go back to one point which Harita's making. CPM has made 56 MLAs recontest this time, which shows their confidence that at least some of their MLAs are well respected within their constituencies. So I think what the CPM believes is that even if there's anti-incumbency against the chief minister, against the government itself, these MLAs enjoy personal rapport in the constituencies and that could really push the CPIM quite a bit. Otherwise, which party will go and give 56 seats? That's one problem which Stalin is facing in Tamil Nadu, that he does not want a lot of the older candidates to contest anymore, but he's not able to push these people out because they want to do one last time. And I think that's about it. One last thing, I don't know if it's just something I noticed, that, in the last 5 years, there have been so many times when Kerala has been targeted by the Sangh Parivar forces, by the BJP, etc. For example, when a movie like the Kerala Story releases, there is this tendency of everybody in the state to then come together and talk about why they feel proud as a Keralite. Look at our literacy rates, look at our other indices, etc. Right? I think LDF is also reaping the benefit of that. So that Kerala pride which people project to sort of push towards others and, tell someone from another state that look how good our state is doing, that is also converted. Kerala pride is converted to some advantage for the LDF because they are seen as the faces behind that Kerala pride, right?
It's like how BJP used to embody this entire Gujarati asmita in Gujarat. They tried it in Maharashtra too. Karnataka also has had that. But I want to ask you finally, both of you, there is anti-incumbency. Who will reap the benefit? Is it a no-brainer that UDF will get the anti-incumbency votes? Because there is one sentiment that BJP would want CPIM over Congress because they don't want another state to go to Congress. So, do you think that BJP might get that anti-incumbency votes too?
I think both BJP and the Congress will get the anti-incumbency vote. But I feel there are so many factors, right? There is a Christian segment which does not like the CPIM but doesn't want to vote for the Congress because they
Of
go with the
IUML.
Muslim
Yeah.
League. There is a Muslim population which will vote for the Congress because there is IUML, also because they're disappointed with the CPM, but nobody is a bloc. They differ from district to district, from seat to seat. I feel nobody's a bloc. I personally know people who are hardcore supporters of the BJP, but in the election they will vote for either the CPIM or the Congress because they have rapport with their constituency leaders of either parties, and they will vote like that. Or they know that the BJP is anyway not going to win, so why should I waste my vote for this or that? I think there are so many factors which come to play. There is no one block. We always say Christians, Muslims. I don't think all Muslims are like, okay, who are we all voting for
Yeah,
together,
yeah.
right? There's no block sentiment. Yeah, largely, yes, we can say they will go either here or there.
And also there are certain statements from BJP leaders that is backfiring. As Danya said, that whole Kerala is a better state. That sentiments, when that sentiments is hurted, when somebody says that, okay, Kerala's infant mortality is due to this reason, the low infant mortality rate is because people migrate, or that kind of baseless statements from BJP, or some statements that is against Kerala is backfiring BJP. At the ground, I have felt that like we are with the BJP, but why do they have to say that our state is the best? So I think that is also backfiring BJP in many constituencies.
The good thing is they're not at least bringing Yogi Adityanath from Uttar Pradesh to talk about governance.
But I should not make fun of this, but they have brought these sadhus.
Why should you not make fun of?
No, in the sense, but it has become such a big meme against them. They brought the Naga sadhus to campaign for them, and it's turned out to be total meme material. I don't know why. So yeah, this BJP's problem is you'll work in the state and you'll deride the state. You're like, this is not good. There's nothing happening here. You can't use the same logic everywhere, right? Anyways, right?
That Aghori coming, even Rajiv Chandrasekhar had to come and deny that like he has no connection with him. They just asked money for the diesel and he just paid them. That's all, nothing else. He did not bring them. So that is the case here. They have to disown the connection with any that kind of sadhus.
They're called Aghori sadhus.
Yeah,
Okay, fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll explain that to you later.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Harita, for joining us. Okay, so after that discussion on election, we actually thought we'll just have one discussion today, but we could not have had this episode without looking at the transgender amendment bill, which has unfortunately been passed in both houses of the parliament. But one important thing has happened from the first topic to second topic. I have seized Pooja's phone because even when the discussions are happening,
What absolute
she looks at her phone.
nonsense. I look at my phone for points.
I think Karnataka government's restrictions on how much accessing of social media should apply to adults.
You remember how they asked you not to peep into my laptop? Stop taking my phone away. My points are there on that.
Anyway, phone has been seized and we are joined by our colleagues Azifa Fatima and Lakshmi Priya. Azifa, welcome to South Central.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
And Lakshmi Priya, who wrote on Manosphere, and I think she became quite popular after writing on the Manosphere. And you're writing a book, Lakshmi Priya?
Yes, currently working on it.
Yeah, so everybody, our recommendations for the next 1 year after the book comes out, every episode will be read Lakshmi Priya's book. Okay, so we'll go to Azifa first. The amendment bill has been passed. There were protests all across India. In fact, I was speaking to someone who said that a lot of the trans people who had gone for the protest in Delhi did not even have money for travel. So they had to pool money. Then they reached Delhi. They went and met several MPs. But despite that, despite all the opposition in the parliament, it has been passed. But for our viewers who perhaps did not keep track of what happened, Azifa, what went on in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha in the last 2 days?
So, if you look at the parliamentary proceedings, there is this overwhelming sense of haste, right? Like, they repeatedly, the MPs kept saying that, why are we rushing this bill? Why are we pushing it immediately when there is a lot of issues going on in the country and in the world as well? And this was repeatedly flagged during the debate, but it was not heeded at all. So when we look at the timeline, the bill was introduced on March 13, and within like a couple of weeks, it was taken up, debated, and then passed as well. And now for a piece of legislation that is like fundamentally, it reshapes how our gender identity is recognized by the law. this is like a very short period of time. And many opposition MPs, like across parties, were also vocal about this. And many of them kept repeatedly asking, why is there urgency, and why are the people who are affected by the law not being consulted? And also, there was very specific demand to send this bill to the standing committee or a select committee for deeper scrutiny. And the government's response to this was to say that the bill was already sent to the committee, and there was an extensive discussion, including a parliamentary committee discussion. But multiple members of the parliamentary committee said that it was never debated in their tenure, and there was a detailed report on this also. So we have this tricky situation where the government is saying that we have examined it, we have discussed it, but the committee members are saying that, we never saw this bill, we did not talk about this at all. And this is what is very curious in this whole bill. Like, what is the sense of urgency to bring it at this point of time? And leader like MPs like Jyotimani and Tamarachi, Saket Gokhale, and everybody, even the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they again and again kept saying that this is not only a mechanism to protect the community, like the bill says, but it is also to say to bring in a system to gatekeep the procedures. And it is essentially telling trans persons that you are not who you are until the state validates it. So it is this elaborate mechanism to just bring them within a gate and say that you are a trans person, you are not a trans person. And this is what happened in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha.
Not just what is urgency, LP Lakshmi Priya, what is also the purpose? Because here the government is trying to redefine what it means to be a transgender person. And do you fear that this will also cause some sort of friction within the community when you legitimize only certain sections based on socio-cultural identities and not some others? Do you worry this could have a ripple effect on that too?
Yeah. So as you were saying, I think at one level, what the law is doing is clearly shifts, gender identity from being an individual's right to self-identify to something that the state has a decisive role in, defining and validating, right? And that's a fundamental change, because earlier, especially after the Nalsa judgment, the idea was that the identity comes from the person and the law's role is to recognize it. Now we're moving towards a model where the identity has to be categorized and, verified and approved and all of that. So alongside that, as you said, the bill is also narrowing the umbrella who counts as transgender. So it prioritizes certain historically recognized socio-cultural identities, for example, the Hijra communities and all of them, while leaving out many others, including trans men, and, genderqueer people, non-binary people. So what you start to say is the risk of creating a hierarchy of recognition here. So where some identities are granted legitimacy, documentation, and maybe even access to rights, while others are effectively pushed to the margin. So they are rendered invisible per se. So in that clearly marks, some kind of a departure from the rights-based framework. So now if you take a step back, there's also a broader ideological question here. The kinds of identities that are being recognized are those that are already, socially and culturally legible. Identities that have a long presence in the subcontinent and, are often embedded in familiar, sometimes religious or traditional frameworks, so to say. So whereas identities that are more fluid, evolving, or less tied to those frameworks, like non-binary, genderqueer identities, they're not being accommodated in the same way. So one major rate is that the state appears more comfortable recognizing forms of gender diversity that fit within existing cultural narratives, rather than fully embracing the idea of, gender as something self-defined and evolving. So, and if you place that within the current political climate, especially where there's open an emphasis on aligning policy with what is seen as traditional or civilizational values, this bill can be read as part of, a wider tendency where diversity is acknowledged, but within carefully drawn boundaries that would adhere to what the state would want. So the concern here isn't just exclusion, it's that recognition itself is kind of becoming selective here. So when you talk about the divisions within community, yes, that is possible. There is, a potential for something like that happening. But see, looking at the kind of opposition that the bill has been gaining so far, I think the community has stood united for most of the part. Essentially, primarily because they are questioning the identity, questioning the idea of self-identification itself, which applies to a lot of people, even people who have,
who adhere to more the traditional standards of what, transgender is, etc. So yeah, we have to see how it goes in the future. But so far, people, especially people in the LGBTQI plus community, have been putting up a united front mostly.
No, so, when we were in school, I think we learned that British used to use this policy of divide and rule, right? So I was thinking that this is almost like that, right? It's divide and rule. Lakshmi was saying in a very polished way, but in a very unpolished way, what the government is doing is that they are creating divisions within the community by recognizing a few and not recognizing the others. Eventually, this will lead to friction within the community itself. And I'm sorry to say that all the people I follow, there are already dialogues as to, did someone do something wrong? Why didn't we talk about this before? There are already questions being raised within the community. And I see a lot of trans people saying that, why are gay, lesbian, bi people not talking more? You should also come out. Some people are perhaps not even aware of what is happening. So I think one question, Pooja, we tried to discuss this last time with Arvind and Rumi also, is that why? Why bring this bill and why this urgency? Nobody seems to have an answer.
Yeah.
So one person I asked was saying that there is talk within the community, which again Lakshmi was hinting in a very nice way, is that they are looking at creating a clear border where they hope that at some point of time, the people they give recognition to will then support the Sangh or the BJP, right? It may not be an immediate impact, but they will say, okay, we were given recognition, at least for that we are thankful, is what the BJP is hoping. I'm not saying it will happen. The second, I saw one wild theory on Twitter today, I don't know if it's true, that university vice chancellors had been asking for a clear legal definition, that there have been a lot of requests from universities, from governments to give a clear definition because this third gender definition was not working. Especially because there is job reservation, etc. in certain, I don't know if that's true, but that is one of the reasons. But nothing really explains why the government did not take the community into confidence and ask their opinion. Like Kalki Subramaniam quit from the Commission for Trans Persons yesterday, and I think one more person has quit. Why would you not take them into...
That's typical BJP, no? Do you have the brute numbers? How many times have they consulted the stakeholders before passing something? They can now road rail anything they want, both in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, despite protests on the roads and within the parliament too.
No, so
that still doesn't answer why in the first place.
No, except this, what Arvind was saying last time, that the BJP is just threatened by any identity which is not within its purview of what is a cultural, what is culturally allowed, right? Which both of you are talking about. Anything
outside of their understanding even is something that they're very uncomfortable with.
That could be one. Remember, we had this talk with Hani Trehan, who's the director of Punjab 95. So Punjab 95 is a movie which talks about the times of the emergency and after, and it really critiques the Congress and Indira Gandhi. But the BJP has banned it. Now, why should the BJP ban a movie which is actually critical of the Congress? Is again a puzzle like this. And what we were thinking is that the BJP doesn't want anything which will encourage dissent.
Dissent, and also, Dhanya, this is a hallmark of anything that is majoritarian, that is autocratic. There is a very tight framework they operate in. Anything outside that ambit, no. Because today they will criticize Congress, tomorrow they will criticize us. So why allow criticism at all, right?
Lakshmi, I want to come back to you. So we are already seeing very strong reactions to this bill, right? There are protests happening like Azifa was explaining, it happened within the parliament also. And there is also the problem of misinformation and even threats. Now, beyond what is happening legally and in the parliament, what is the social climate like? Are people facing more threats? Is there more misinformation?
Yeah. So the unfortunate thing about, especially when it comes to laws like this, it's that it's not just changing policy, right? They essentially shape what people feel is acceptable to say and do. So when a law is narrowing who's recognized as transgender and it's introducing ideas like verification and certification and all of that, it can end up reinforcing kind of a broader message that some identities are more real or more legitimate than others. And there is a lot of misinformation already on the ground because there are tendencies for people to, constantly conflate and confuse between intersex identities and transgender identities. They think that trans people are someone, who are born with intersex variations. So there is a lot of misinformation about what the basic categorization of different gender identities are already on the ground, which is an issue that we have had with our education as well already. So we're already seeing the misinformation, etc. This, with the law coming in, with the legitimization of the state as well added to it, there are a lot of this extra disinformation, the idea that people are faking identities, these certain mocking arguments, all of that have emerged. And we have already spoken to people in the community who have been saying that they have been getting threatening messages. So what we're already seeing, all of this doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It's getting validated or emboldened when the state itself starts drawing certain lines, right? And they can have very real consequences. Like it can mean more scrutiny of people's bodies and identities, more everyday harassment, whether it be at workplaces, whether it be in public space or even within families for that matter, that genderqueer, LGBTQI plus people already face a lot of harassment in these spaces. So this is basically adding to it. And as we are already hearing, things like threatening calls or intimidation have been happening extensively. We've been seeing Facebook posts about, asking people, why can't they just go and have a medical checkup? What is so wrong with it and all of that. So the basic idea of what exactly gender identity means is all like convoluted at this point because the state itself is not recognizing it anymore. So there's also a deeper shift here, like from seeing transgender identity as something tied to dignity, their own dignity and autonomy. It's being shifted to something that needs to be proven or policed essentially. And once that shift happens at the level of law, it becomes much easier for society to adopt that same policing instinct towards, trans people especially. So the concern isn't just about what the law says here. It's about the environment it creates, where questioning, doubting, or even targeting transgender people can start to feel kind of normalized. It's kind of signaling whose rights are negotiable here. So yeah, that's what's happening right now.
And just to add to that, 2 points. One is that there is this common misinformation that the whole trans bill is, just gone. So, like many people I spoke to while, when I go out during the election coverage and everything, they are like, now there is no trans bill, these people are not, recognized or anything. So that is one huge misinformation that is going on the ground. And the second part of it is when we talk about attacks and threats, we've already been seeing a huge increase in cyber attacks, right? We've been seeing in Kerala especially, there are organized groups attacking queer persons. And now that attacks have formally turned towards trans persons also. It was always there. Now it is just multiple times worse. And since the law is also just very confused for everybody, unless they track it completely, they are like, there is no law, there is nothing, you are not even recognized by the government, then why do you talk to us? Why are you here in the first place? Here as in the social media and in the society and everything included, right? And that is something that we are seeing over the past few days, and it's only going to get much worse in the coming days.
It's a community that has faced persecution from all parts of the political spectrum, not just the right. And now you're opening it up to the state machinery, which otherwise is hostile to everybody. Now they can dictate what a person's life should look like. And it's just so sad that, there is no logic, there's no explanation given as to why this was brought, even in the parliament. And it just...
actually, Azifa has written quite a lot about how there are organized groups in Kerala. I mean, Kerala is not an exception. I think it's there in other states also. But religious groups together, they really attack these communities. And now they're legitimized by law, right? They're like, why can't we question these people? Okay, so finally, I want to ask you, Azifa, there's definitely a lot of disappointment, and I would say shock is the right word than disappointment. It was like a bolt in the blue, right? What are the options now before the community? Because any moment now the president can sign the bill and it becomes a law.
Gazetted law, yeah.
I mean, at this stage, I think it's very important to understand that, yes, the bill is passed and it is just waiting for an assent. But the response from within the trans community as a whole is not also about rushing straight to the court. There are some groups planning to do that right away. But there is also a lot of voices coming from within the community saying that we should pause for a minute and consult and act collectively. So when there is a split within the community, it becomes very difficult to move ahead because when the whole system is trying to erase your identity, when there is a split within the community, it becomes even more confusing for everybody and easier to attack the community as a whole. So there are many people trying to say that we have to hold consultations in different states and different union territories and come together at a local, regional level and discuss what this actually means for them in practice, because there are multiple groups of people and multiple identities within the community itself, right? And each of these changes impact them in different ways. So this is not a uniform experience for everybody. So the activists are urging that we should come together, consult, and then move forward, posing a united front. And the impact of law here varies depending on where we are and our access to documentation, our socioeconomic position, and which identity we fall under also. So the idea is to, before filing petitions, make sure that everybody's voice is included in the responses. Response reflects the diversity of the community. And legally speaking, there are multiple pathways available. One option is to approach the Supreme Court directly. And there is also another option to approach High Courts of India first. Because when we go to High Courts, it creates a kind of layered constitutional dialogue, right? Like, because different courts can examine different aspects of law and what Supreme Court has said. And this can strengthen the overall challenge. So that is one option that they're making. And this High Court option is also accessible because many people don't have the resources to go to Supreme Court and put up a petition and put up a whole fight. And substantively, any legal challenge is going to lean heavily on the fundamental constitutional principles like equality, dignity, and right to personal autonomy and all. And very importantly, it will draw from the precedent set by Nalsa Puttaswamy versus Union of India case, the right to privacy and everything. Because again, the whole medical examination part violates the right to privacy of a person. So in that sense, the legal grounds are very strong, but what is very important here is the strategy. So it's not just about filing a case quickly and going to the court, but it is also about filing it in the right way with the right representation. So the community is right now ensuring that the challenge is going to be collective and inclusive, but not fragmented.
It is a huge challenge now for the community. And we thank you, Lakshmi and Azifa, for joining us. We will go to the recommendations. Pooja.
And that's what I was pulling up on my phone.
Yes, she was using
I
her
was
phone
pulling up
even now.
the recommendation.
Yes, please.
Akar Patel's column, Can Iran Win? Will US agree to Tehran's terms and do the right thing? It's a thought-provoking piece where he's spoken about why he wants Iran to win and what does win in this context mean. So yeah, that's my recommendation for the week.
I want to recommend my own stories, which I have done in last January. The one is about BJP's narrative in Kerala on how they are carrying out, not BJP's, I'm sorry, Sangh Parivar's narrative in Kerala on how they are carrying out Garvapsi in the state. And my investigation is on how much Garvapsi, what is this whole Garvapsi narrative and how much truth into it? What are the numbers? How many of the Christians are converting back to Hinduism? So, which I have realized that it's most of the numbers fall under Dalit Christians, and it is the conversion to Hinduism by Dalit Christians are for reservation. So please do read that story. And the second story is about love jihad narrative in the state. And that is also a data story on how many are converted from which religion to what religion. Yeah, those are my two recommendations.
I want to recommend this book, Bad News by Anjan Sundaram, Last Journalists in a Dictatorship. It's about what happens in Congo at the brink of a whole dictatorship emerging. And when reading that, it was like a sort of a deja vu, like something is happening which we already know. And that is a book that I highly recommend. And that is a book I took from your bookshelf also then.
Yeah.
Did you know?
No, my bookshelf gets empty every time Azifa comes. Yeah. Lakshmi?
Yeah, so since we started with the manosphere, I think I'll recommend Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates, which is something that I've been, using extensively for my research as well. It has been a very eye-opening, like brilliantly written book, and where Laura kind of descends into this vast, underworld system of online misogyny, and she just guides us through the various circles of what she terms the manosphere and all of that. And it's very eye-opening. She has an alter ego, and she goes into these Reddit spaces as an incel, and then she, looks at how these people interact and all of that. It's a very enlightening read. So yeah, I'd like to recommend that as a first reading material before my own book comes. So yeah.
She's preparing the ground.
No, but imagine having an alter ego and living in manospheres. I would just go
As an
mad.
incel.
For 3 days, I'll be an incel. 4th day, I'll abuse them.
I already have multiple alter egos there. I completely understand.
Incels on manosphere. Beware, Lakshmi is lurking.
Can you stop it? She needs to do research.
Okay, so my recommendation for the week is a profile of Himanta Biswa Sarma, especially if you're somebody who doesn't know Assam politics well like me. You should go read it. The profile is by Asta Savyasachi and Sanskrita Bharadwaj. It's on the News Minute and on News Laundry. It's a profile where they look at how this Congress strongman who was supposed to take over from senior Gogoi really shifts to the BJP and becomes one of the most toxic voices within the party itself. But that's not the profile is not just about his ideology, but it's also about his ambition, scale, business, etc. So do go read that profile and follow our election coverage. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a chaotic episode because our recording was not working. Somebody had to drop out.
Hey, but you and I have worked in TV. We used to hours.
Yes, but Ann Pooja was looking at her phone throughout.
Oh,
so
nonsense.
Anyway.
Such misinformation you spread.
Thank you very much to our producer, Bhuvan. Thank you to editor, Jasim, Sukanya and Yana, who take care of South Central, and to everyone else listening in. Do tune in next week. And like I said, follow our election coverage.